a little formality because, as Jonathan said earlier, Sir John Mervey Setakaya. Sir John has been serving as the Assistant Dean at the New College Postgraduate Village, and sadly they will be leaving us very soon. This is their last formal dinner, last few days in Sydney. So I'd like to invite Neighbour and Sir John to come up here with me. And I just want to be able to say thank you to them. They've been long-standing members of the community. Sir John arrived without Mervey and was a lonely PhD student here in Sydney with us. And if I can invite Grace up to come and take a photo of us all with all us smiling, that'd be great as well. I just wanted to say, if everybody could thank Sir John and Mervey for their service to college over the last few years. We now turn to our guest of honour for this evening, and just by way of introduction, Mr. Harry Turner spent the first half of his professional career leading teams in global firms such as Anderson Consulting, now Accenture, and Macquarie Bank. And at Macquarie Bank he led a team of over 3,000 technologists. These roles took Harry and his family to live in Ireland, Perth in Western Australia, not in Scotland, and Hong Kong. Harry and his family then moved to Oxford in the UK as he changed career direction. He was seeking to live out Jesus Christ's call to love and serve the poor by working with organisations like Opportunity International, a global microfinance organisation, Oiko Credit, a global impact investor, and Diabetes Capital, and Impact Investment Fund in India. Most recently, he co-founded the Tantalon Impact Fund, which is a US $60 million impact investment manager focused on investing in small to medium enterprises in sub-Saharan Africa. The purpose of this is to create jobs, bring hope, and transform lives. And to date, Tantalon has invested in 18 portfolio companies which collectively employ either directly or indirectly over 140,000 people. On returning to Australia in 2020, Harry also joined the boards of Common Grace, which people may have heard and features in some of our case articles, and of Many Rivers Microfinance. And the purpose is to leverage the skills and experiences gained to serve the disadvantaged or the marginalised communities here in Australia. Harry holds an MBA with distinction from the University of Oxford and first-class honours in computer science here at our favourite university. He's married to Julie, and they have 3 adult children, all of whom came to New College. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Harry Turner.
Well, good evening. Before we start, I'd also like to acknowledge the Bidjigal as the traditional custodians of the land that we're meeting on today. I pay my respects to the elders past and present, and recognise the enduring connection Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders have with this country. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a great privilege to be speaking here today. The last time I was on this stage, I was receiving a very prestigious college award, which you didn't mention, the Light Switch Award for the most on and off relationship in college. I don't know where you've got that on the wall there, but that was pretty much the only award I won when I was in college.
It wasn't with me.
Comes up. But before I kick into my talk, I just want to reflect on this very special day. Today, June the 3rd, is Mabo Day. It's the last day of National Reconciliation Week, which is bookended by two major milestones in the lives of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. It begins on May 27, as we remember the day in 1967 that by referendum the country voted to amend the Constitution to allow the federal government to make laws with respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and to allow those same people to be counted in the national census. And then June the 3rd celebrates the historic decision by the High Court of Australia in 1992 to overturn the classification of Australia as terra nullius, that is, no man's land. I've spoken to many First Nations people and I know that this ruling was very meaningful for them. This ruling said that we as a country recognise the humanity of their ancestors and recognise that they had rights and that some of those rights have been taken from them and that where appropriate and possible some level of restorative action should be taken. Now you might wonder why a crusty old white guy descended from a 10-pound Tom on one side and who can trace his ancestry back to a convict ship on the other, with no Indigenous heritage at all, thinks these are super important days. Well, in explaining this, I think it's firstly very important to recognise that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders still suffer from gross injustice. Lifespans 8 or 9 years shorter than other Australians, and an incarceration rate among the highest of any people group in the world. The rate of children being taken from their homes 11 times higher than other Australians. The raw facts show that there's still a material problem. There's still work to do. So I believe we're all diminished by injustice and that we're all made whole by its repair. It's clear that the victims of injustice cannot alone eradicate that injustice. Rather, it's we as a society and we as a community working together to bring injustice, to bring an end to injustice. So that's what reconciliation is all about. That's what National Reconciliation Week is all about. And when we do manage to right the wrong of this injustice, we can all look forward to being inheritors of an extraordinary history and work together toward a bright shared future. So happy Mabo Day. New College saved my life. Now, you might think that's quite an extraordinary thing to say, but I believe it to be true. When I came to university in Sydney, I didn't get into college. I was neither smart enough or hardworking enough to join you lot. I was dirt broke. My parents had no money. My dad was an Anglican priest, but the diocese he was in had gone bankrupt several years before, and we'd frequently gone without pay as a result. He was resourceful, thanks to his gardening skills, even in the desert, and his hunting skills. We frequently had kangaroo or rabbit on the menu. We never went hungry, but we definitely lived very much hand to mouth. When I moved to Sydney, they gave me $400. On top of that, I had a study, which just about paid my rent, but I had very little disposable income for things like food and other activities. I remember calling my mum several months into being here and asked for more money, and in tears she told me, they didn't have any more money. That $400 was their entire life savings. So I was an 18-year-old boy from the country, absolutely no clue about the city, no money. I'd been looking for a job, but it's amazing how quickly I managed to find one once there was no alternative. To save money, I moved into a slum of a one-bedroom apartment with a guy I met at uni. And this was a pretty horrible existence. I slept on a mattress on a kitchen floor. I worked 2 cleaning jobs to earn enough money to survive. Occasionally went to uni. Spending time in this dire flat was pretty grim, actually. Not only was it tiny and full of mould, but my flatmate had a girlfriend, and the two of them had frequent, very loud sex in the room next door to mine. And so as a result, I did anything I could to hang out in other places. I connected with one of my mates from my hometown who connected me with one of his drug dealer mates in Newtown. And I got quite busy with the happy week. And things then started really spiralling down quite quickly for me. Well, I'd grown up in the church, I didn't really have any faith. That said, one night, stoned out of my brain, lying on the kitchen floor mattress, feeling like I was face first on the ceiling, I asked God for help. I'm just terrible. God answered. Not long after this, I got a call from New College. A room had opened up, and none of the smart people wanted it. So I moved into the dog box in 3G, which, by the way, was half the size of the thing you guys call a dog box. But it was awesome to have my own space. I was the only fresher in a group of old boys. Here they are welcoming me into college with a customary bucketing. I don't know if you recognise the guy on the left there, Dr. James Peach. There's a Shoal in this picture, and there's also a Blanche in this picture, so, you know, these are my old boys. But then I threw myself into college life. I went on harbour cruises. This yellow singlet I wore pretty much all of first and second year. Let's see, I studied a bit, and this is me studying. See, there's a word study behind me. I don't know who was in 1G at the time who was studying. I certainly wasn't, but I got involved in the college play, obviously as some sort of cricketer or something. I did a little more study. Some of you might recognise the erstwhile Dave Hayes at the top of that picture. I don't know who the girl was who was hanging over the edge there. I was an OE leader. Our OE week was called Spank Week. I think Georgia came up with that name. I'm not going to take credit for it. I was pretty popular with the ladies. I directed the New College Review alongside Jane and Phil, and we called our New College Review, "Excuse me, madam, your dog's about to cry." Try put that on a t-shirt. I'm going to blame Phil for that one, it's not mine. After nearly 3 years in college, I moved out with a bunch of ex-college folks, and I finally put my head down and started studying. I managed to convince a professor here that I was worth taking a risk on for an honours thesis, even though I hadn't met the minimum credit average. And then I managed to talk my way into first-class honours. Clearly my timing was terrible. I graduated in first-class honours in artificial intelligence focused on neural networks. If I'd done that today, I'd have been really booking it. But, you know, a tech graduate in the 90s wasn't too bad. Oh, there we go, last picture. New college really, for me, brought the two biggest things to happen in my life. Firstly, it was here in New College that I became a Christian. There was this guy in college, I think his name was Leon, and he was one of the designated smiley people. I don't know, they had some title that was different. And these smiling assassins would wander around college and ask you about God. Even all of the Christians tried to hide from them. And we went to extraordinary lengths to hide from these guys. It wasn't unusual for us to hide in the cupboard in our room so as not to be detected. Anyway, Leon caught me in a weak moment. I'd been on the phone home, and in those days the phones were connected by a string to the wall. Most of you wouldn't know that. Anyway, he skulked up behind me while I wasn't looking, and I turned around, and there he was. And after some small talk, he said, "Harry, are you a Christian?" To which I answered, "Probably." And then Leon said, "Well, I think that means probably not." I said, "What do you mean?" And he said, "Well, if you were a Christian, you'd probably know it, wouldn't you?" So I told him to F off and I walked away. I promised I wouldn't use the actual words I used. But then I sat in my room stewing over how this a-hole was so arrogant as to tell me what I believed or didn't believe. But the logic of this argument really annoyed me. I was in fact doing a logic degree. And in truth, I realised he was probably right. I probably would know it if I was a Christian. I started going to the library and looked for books about Christianity. You guys, I think you Googled stuff now. And I read a whole pile of different books on a pile of different religions. In the end, I read a book called Who Moved the Stone? And I found that overwhelmingly convincing. I was convinced that Jesus Christ was a real person, that he died and that he rose again. After a misstart trying out uni church, I was actually kicked out of a uni church Bible study group for asking too many questions. I was invited along to St John's in Maroubra, and I loved it. Sunday evening, a bunch of surfer dudes would turn up to church wearing their wetsuits around their waist and park their boards at the back of church. We had a meal together, which was great for me. That was my second meal of the evening. The pastor and his wife, Stephen and Marion Gabbett, were just awesome. They wouldn't just answer my questions, but they'd encourage questions. It was brilliant. And I dragged anyone who would listen along to St John's. It was such a privilege to be with so many of these same people at St John's recently when my darling daughter Cleo, who was a collegian here herself, and her husband Tom, also a collegian in the middle of this picture, got married. Most of these people in this photo come from those early years. Secondly, it was here in college I was introduced to the young lady in the front of this picture on the left-hand side there. In truth, I didn't really remember her name at that ball. I think I was still in a light switch moment with the girl on the other side. 2 seats over. 2 seats over. Yes. Anyway, I do remember, however, the next day when George's friend from Canberra claimed that she couldn't be stocked. We used to have, I think they're still on the wall outside, those stocks were real, and we did used to put people in them. But claiming you couldn't be stocked was a stockable offence, and I was the holder of the stock keys, and so we obliged, covering her with all sorts of wonderful things before she got on the bus back to Canberra. Anyway, apparently that day she fell in love with me. Now I say it like that, it sounds a little like Stockholm Syndrome, doesn't it? Anyway, no matter, a couple of years later we were married. It's nearly 31 years ago. In truth, these two things were really just the beginning of a journey. With the background of having been relatively poor as a youngster, I was super focused on making money. I landed a job with Anderson Consulting, then Macquarie Bank. I worked ridiculously hard, I got promoted, I moved to Hong Kong, I led a bunch of major projects. I was focused really entirely on making money, and I was really good at it. So it was in Hong Kong, working for Macquarie Bank, that God introduced me to real poverty. I was invited to visit the work of a charity in the Philippines, and I said no. A lot, actually. I was invited a lot, and I said no a lot. And in truth, part of the reason for that was because I had convinced myself that as a child I was poor, and now I had lifted myself out of poverty through sheer determination and hard work. I was unsympathetic to people living in poverty, and I'd assumed that much of their problem was their own lack of ambition or hard work. But I was tricked into going to the Philippines. They put this trip in place with a wonderful holiday. And when I was there, it was where I saw real poverty. I walked through slums like this one, and I spent time talking with, and importantly listening to, people living in these conditions. I realised how naive my narrative was. Many of these kids didn't have the opportunity even to go to school. The supposedly free schools in the Philippines would do a reading and writing test before you could enter. So the kids needed to go to paid preschools in order to get in. And if their parents were poor and illiterate, they were unable to. Access to healthcare was limited, and in truth, the healthcare that was there was poor. Many of these kids were lucky to get one meal a day. In this context, the idea that lack of ambition caused poverty became obviously absurd. I also realised that my version of poor was a lie. I grew up in the country with free healthcare, free education. In my case, I lived in a rectory, so free housing. Government funded Austudy to assist me to go to university, not because I was smart, but because I was poor. And then as an educated white man, I walked into quality employment. I wasn't poor, I grew up comparatively rich, with huge opportunities, surrounded by institutions designed to help me, and living in a society designed to benefit people just like me. So as a family, we decided to get very heavily involved in this charity organisation called International Care Ministries. I felt that God was calling us not just to give our money, which we did in significant sums, but to give our time. This is Julie, pregnant with Will, on a trip to the Philippines. Some of you might recognise my daughter Cleo. Wasn't she a cutie? I used to organise trips from Quarry Bank to go down to build houses. This is me with my oldest son, Jack. And I can tell you that I'm sure the families who managed to get into the houses, actually I think they rebuilt that one because I'm a terrible builder. The people who moved into these homes felt it to be a great blessing. I can tell you firsthand that we were also blessed. In 2011, after 12 years at Macquarie Bank, I left to join, as was mentioned earlier, the organisation Opportunity International, a global microfinance organisation. We got to do poverty alleviation full-time. This is my son, Will. He's sitting over here today. He's sitting in a classroom in Ghana, and I don't know whether you can see this, but he seems to be listening to the teacher for the first and only time in his entire life. It was really here while working at Opportunity that God taught me my next lesson: humility. I think there's some people down here who are going to doubt that. But I'd come to Opportunity having been extraordinarily successful in Anderson's and in Macquarie Bank. And I believed that I would be able to make Opportunity International the largest banking group in the world by customer numbers. God had other ideas. After just 4 years at Opportunity, I decided to step down from my role, having gone nowhere near achieving that target. In hindsight, perhaps I should have asked Jules about that before I did that, but I felt it was clear that I wasn't the right person for them. During my time at Opportunity, however, I came to a greater understanding of the role God wanted me to play in helping people who are trapped in poverty. By that time, I'd spent nearly 2 decades using nice little catchphrases like, give a man a fish and he eats for a day, teach a man to fish and he eats for life, or giving a hand up, not a handout. It was while I was in Opportunity, I came to see these phrases as totally flawed. The idea of both of these phrases posits the teacher or the lifter as the hero in the story. What I learned here is I was not the hero. Getting to know these remarkable people who managed to fight for stuff, to provide for their children in often the most brutal of circumstances. They were the true heroes. became clear to me that I shouldn't be going to these places with an attitude of teaching or lifting. Rather, I should go to these environments with an attitude of listening and learning. And then doing whatever I could to support. I got Claude to do me a picture earlier. It's a little like these two pictures. I think the one on the left is this sort of idea of giving a hand up. You've got somebody at the top who's in the position of power lifting people. But I think the true story is on the right-hand side here, where we work together to both climb out of the pit that we're in. It's just sometimes when we're wealthy, we don't realise we're in that pit. In 2016, alongside my former board chair at Opportunity International, I co-founded the Talenton Impact Fund. And Talenton's basic premise is that enabling people to get quality jobs is life transformative. To facilitate this, we raise investment capital primarily in the US, and we invested in companies started by incredible founders living in the communities we seek to serve, that have generally the potential to scale 5 to 10-fold with access to investment capital, which is very hard to find. So now I have the great privilege of working alongside these remarkable businesses, an electric motorcycle company enabling thousands of motorcycle taxi riders in Kenya to generate 40% more income than they did when they were riding their ice bikes, or an avocado business working with thousands of smallholder farmers across Kenya to sell fresh avocados and avocado oil into Europe, or a cook stove manufacturer providing affordable and clean cooking to millions of African families, or a dairy business in Rwanda whose workforce is drawn overwhelmingly from the deaf community in Rwanda. And many, many more like this. As was mentioned earlier, we now have 18 portfolio companies who employ directly or indirectly over 140,000 people. I am so blessed to be able to walk alongside these genuine heroes who are serving their communities by creating businesses large and small, creating jobs, bringing hope, and transforming lives. Now, the honest bit here, when I came to this college, I really wasn't the nicest kid around. Honestly, I was quite racist, not in a way that I believed that Aboriginal or Asian people or whomever were any less than I. I just thought it was funny to mock them. Happily sang along songs of quite overtly racist songs of people like Kevin Bloody Wilson. I could quote the entire 12th Man, for those who remember that, who thought it was funny to make fun of names of Indian, Pakistani, Sri Lankan cricket players. I turned up here to the University of New South Wales and I felt somehow grieved by the fact that there were so many Asian students here, as if they'd somehow done something wrong to them. I was also pretty sexist and just a bit homophobic. Again, not in a way that suggested that women weren't equal to men or that members of the LGBTQ community were somehow lesser, but rather in a way that I just paid no attention to the implicit biases in everyday life. I was more than happy to critique in my cricket team the player for throwing like a girl, and I was more than happy in my rugby team to critique the player who was a bit soft for being like a gay man. The journey that started here in college, that God has taken me on over the last 30 years, has really helped me to see these biases that at the time I didn't even know I had. The journey started with me coming to know Jesus, the great reconciler. It took a step forward as I came to know people, many whom I met here in college, with different views to my own. It took another step forward when I came to know people who were suffering from injustice in many different communities. God put all these people in my path and asked me to listen and learn. We live in a world today where social media wants us to fear and resent people who are different from us. That was me when I walked through this door. Maybe that's some of you. But the journey that started here, through Leon's blunt question, through the slums of Manila, through yarning with Aboriginal Australians and hearing what this land means to them, taught me that the person I assumed I needed to to save or to fix or to teach was almost always the one who had something profound to teach me. So I really want to encourage you all today, before you make judgments about people groups, whether that be people from different cultures, different races, whether that be people from different political perspectives, you could be a Labour voter or a One Nation voter or a Trump supporter, or before you judge any of those people, I really want to encourage you to get to know them. I am convinced that this will have a profoundly positive impact on you, because I truly believe that together we can right the wrongs of injustice. And as we do that, we will bring greater benefit for all of us. Thank you.
We now come to that time of the evening when there's opportunity to ask questions of our distinguished guests, and our beautiful system is equipped with microphones. Is that right, Ollie? 2 microphones. So, questions please. I think we're having a slight microphone issue. Right, we're over this side, in the middle. Nathan, in fact, it's a bit hard to see faces from up here, especially when you're old.
Thanks very much, Harry, for your talk. I understand you're quite involved in microfinance, and I also understand that when it comes to econometrics academia, the jury's quite out as to actually how effective it is at lifting people out of poverty. I guess, is that your understanding of what the literature is, and how do you deal with it?
So when I joined Opportunity International, 2011, having won the Nobel Prize, microfinance, and basically won the Nobel Prize in 2006 as the silver bullet for solving poverty, I joined Opportunity International, and there's an article in the BBC saying that microfinance was causing people to commit suicide in India. And it became really clear that pretty much no microfinance company on the planet had done any data collection or any assessment of the impact of what they were doing. It was a great story, and it was a very powerful story, but it wasn't backed up by any evidence. At Opportunity, we put in place a measurement program to seek to understand whether microfinance was good, bad, indifferent. And the data we had showed that, in effect, there was a group of about 10% of the cohort of people we were serving that were tremendously aided by microfinance. Real entrepreneurs. There was a group which represented about 80% of the cohort who were helped. Having a bank account is useful, but it wasn't life transformative. And then there was a group of people who were actually harmed by the level of indebtedness they had. And seeking to be honest about that, in truth, is part of the reason I left Opportunity. So the work that I do now primarily focuses on investment in small, medium enterprise, which creates jobs. I'm a real believer, if you, and I've done this, so I know this certainly anecdotally, if you ask someone what would they prefer, a $200 loan to start a small business or a regular job, the vast majority of people will say the regular job. And regular jobs are created in the small, medium enterprise sector here. They're created in the small, medium enterprise sector in most of the world, but the small, medium enterprise sector in many developing nations is massively underfunded. So there is justification to say microfinance, there's some questions out about its impact. We saw that directly.
Thanks very much. Maybe I'll reconsider my Kiva account.
I do want to say, the 80% that are helped, it's actually important to understand the value, people here, I worked for a bank, Quarry Bank, And in 2008, people were pretty upset with the banks. And my constant refrain there was, I can take you to a world without banks, and it's not a good world. So people lose huge percentage of their savings. They save money, often in assets. They save money in, under their beds. It's prone to be stolen. It's prone to be damaged. It's flood. It's prone. There's all sorts of reasons why a world with good, well-structured banks is a good world. So don't completely give up on your keeper investment. So,
Namaste, thank you for being here. Your story was really inspiring. My question is, what advice do you have for students at NC and NCTV to make the best out of their experience? Thank you.
What advice do I have? Well, firstly, I think the message I was trying to get across here is we each have to listen to each other. We are super good, and I was brilliant, at pretending to listen whilst formulating an argument against whatever it was I thought you were going to say. I think the number one thing I really want to encourage you all to do, okay, I'm hearing that I still do this, but, only in certain circumstances, is we really need to listen and learn. I spend time, my investors are in the US, a lot of my investors are proud flag-waving Trump supporters. And, I know a lot of people find it very hard to sort of stomach that. I'd say get to know these people before you judge them. And so first thing is, I think we need to kind of listen and learn. And I think the second thing I would encourage you all to do, obviously I spent the first half of my career working in all sorts of corporate enterprises. I would say that's a really good thing. People who feel like they should go out and work for charity straight away, go for it. Don't lead me to suggest that you shouldn't do that. But the skills and experience you learn, one of the things that frustrates me most when I go and sit in a cafe in Kenya or in Rwanda or places like this is, seeing a 25-year-old white man trying to explain life to a bunch of 50, 60-year-old African people who know so much more than the person who is talking to them. And we build into our kind of psyche that we know lots and lots of stuff. I would say, I want to really encourage you, learn lots and lots of stuff, because that is really powerful. And those skills can be used to support people who are doing great stuff. So I'd encourage you, don't be afraid to go out and get a corporate job and learn lots of good stuff. That's actually really good. Yeah. Yell it nice and loud, I'll repeat. Oh, sorry.
Sorry for the really clunky phrasing of the question, but how do you sort of, as a Christian, walk and find the balance between caring for people's spiritual needs, as in the challenge to share your faith and this sort of call to eternity, with caring for people's physical needs, which is what you do lots of the time?
Yeah, thank you. Great question. First thing I'd say is, I'm by no means the expert on this. There's a guy named Rich Stearns, who was the CEO of World Vision. He wrote a book called Hole in the Gospel. And what he did was he kind of painted a picture of what the gospel's like without all of the commands to care for people who are poor. And it's a pretty empty old book. So first thing I'd say, read that book. It's a great read. I really like to lean on. There's a story in the Bible where Jesus is approached by 10 lepers. For those who are Christians amongst us, you'll remember this. And they come up and ask him to be healed. And what Jesus does is he heals them. And they all go off and get the sort of testing. And one guy comes back. One guy, two guys? One guy. One guy comes back. And, if you believe that Jesus is the sovereign God, Son of God, he knew that only one of those guys was going to come back. But he cared for all 10 regardless. And so I want to encourage us, I think caring for people's spiritual needs is super important. And we're a faith-based fund. We try and work in our fund with CEOs and founders who know and love Jesus, so they can be salt and light in the world to the people they're working with. That's our desire. but we will serve whoever, whenever they need it, because I believe that's the model that Jesus set for us. Terrific question.
Hi, you mentioned that you co-directed a review play called Excuse Me Ma'am, I Think Your Dog's About to Cry. That's a pretty curious topic. Can you tell us what the plot of that was, and do you have any fun memories of what that review was about?
What was the main song?
I've just gone for a dementia walk yesterday, and that's I have no idea what the plot of that was. I remember the funniest part of this was, this is Maya Crossfield, her father was my best man, and was Phil walking onto stage with a banana strapped to his head. And I would walk onto stage in the middle of any scene, mostly when they were going badly. Any scene, if it was going badly, Phil would walk on with a banana on his head, and I would come out and go, "Hey, you've got a banana on your head." And that was the whole sketch. We'd walk off, we did it 3 or 4 times, and in the end we started, I think the last song was, "He's got a banana on his head." That was the whole song. No plot line, it was, Down the back.
I can see hands, I'm a long way away.
Hi Harry, thank you for your talk. I've heard some people claim that the only benefits of outreach trips are to either boost tourism or to make the people who go feel like they're making a difference. So what do you believe are the benefits of short-term outreach trips?
Yeah.
And also how can we ensure that the impacts of our short trips last beyond the duration of our stay?
Yeah, great question. I was one of those people. I hated the idea of short-term trips. I thought it was an enormous waste of money. And I felt that, those, wealthy donors who decided to flip off around the world and go and visit the work in the charities they were serving would have been just far better off taking that cash and putting it into the work they were doing. That was where I stood whilst saying no over and over again to going to visit the work of the charity that I went to in the Philippines. I would say the biggest value proposition of short-term ministry, of mission trips, actually isn't for the people you're going to serve. It's actually for you. And it's not a bad thing. Because I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing today, and I wouldn't have spent the last 20 years of my career working to serve people in abject poverty if it hadn't been for a short-term mission trip. So I think the long term there is value. If you go, particularly if you go with the mindset that it's important for you to learn, and it's important for you to really see and understand, and then serve in whatever way you possibly can. Again, I love this. The ICM runs some trips where they go and help, build a toilet. Is that the least expensive way of building a toilet? It's definitely not. Is that the way that the organisation who is supporting that ministry can generate the most possible income over time? Absolutely. So, I think you've got to go with a learning heart and a serving heart. I think, put your hand up if you've been on a short-term mission trip to another part of the world. Put your hand down if it didn't make a massive impact in your life. So, I think what you'll see is everyone who has gone has been served. And this is why I say, as I said at the very beginning, we are all lifted up when we seek to solve the problems of injustice, not just the people who are suffering that injustice.
Where are we? There? I can see hands. If you've got a microphone, please ask a question.
I can see.
Hello. Oh, this is loud. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to come and talk to us. My question for you is, given your experience with both your faith and your wide number of perspectives that you've encountered, what would you say to the idea of evil? Is there a true evil that exists, or is evil all a matter of perspective?
Evil, is that the question?
Yes.
Evil. I feel like I've seen evil face to face. Evil definitely exists. And it doesn't take much to walk through some of these environments and see the tragedy I used to take groups of people from Macquarie Bank, so we were sitting in our sort of fancy tower in Hong Kong. Most of the people I took weren't believers, pretty thin set, Christians at Macquarie Bank. I think the set was one when I was there. But I took people into these environments, and most people were physically shocked by what they saw, because the world they wanted to believe in was not the world they were walking through. And we very often get tied up. The world we see here, this beautiful place, this beautiful university, beautiful. The beautiful people we get to spend time with. It's easy for us to focus our attention in there, and all of this stuff that's happening, bad things happen, seems to be external to us. But oftentimes, in one way or another, we are confronted by that evil. And I think it's truly there. I went to visit the Holocaust Museum in Rwanda, which was really quite galling as an experience. And on that, they had a video clip of I think it was a French-Canadian guy who was the head of the UN forces in Rwanda at the time, who was told he could do nothing. And his overwhelming response to that is, I saw evil. I looked at evil in the face, and it was awful. So I believe in evil, but I believe in a much stronger power than evil.
Hello. Hi, I'd like to ask, what other religions did you explore? What were your thoughts on them, and what convinced you that Christianity was the right one?
Wow. That's also a good question. I read a couple of books. I read about Islam. I read about Judaism. I read a little bit about Buddhism. I kind of like the idea of Buddhism. There were some things about it that sort of appealed to me. I will be honest with you and say I think quite a few of those books were written by people who didn't believe in those things. So I don't know that I gave it a real proper nudge. I thought I was doing that at the time, but sort of my hindsight is, some of those books were reasonably biased, and I want to acknowledge that. But I think, I sort of, what I tried to do in that conversation was, I wanted to sort of test the boundary of, I'd grown up in a Christian household, and I wanted to read some other stuff. It's fair to say, my old man wasn't a frequent proponent of discursive about other religions. They were all just dismissed, which actually I think is not great, and we shouldn't be dismissive of anyone. So I read a few books. I couldn't tell you the name of those books. I read one that I threw away because I thought it was just so overwhelmingly biased that I just thought the person writing this is not actually writing a real proper discursive. But yeah, I'm not sure that answers your question, but probably not the deepest dive. My family would tell you I'm not a great reader. I was so happy with Google. It was,
Hello, thank you for your talk. I was really inspired by your humility and perspective, and I hope that I can have that same kind of humility moving forward more in my life. Many people would tell you that I'm arrogant and a little bit of a person who likes to annoy other people frequently.
I'm liking you already.
But my question is, I'm also a person who has a strong internal sense of justice. And I really don't like it when I'm talking to someone and they say something and it's clearly very, it comes out of a place of insecurity in them, but they're making fun of or mocking other people, like you talked about.
Yep.
And I wanted to know, how do you talk to someone and listen to them and still care for them, but also at the same time hold the line and say, what you're saying is untrue and harmful, so that you don't leave people who may be listening or people who aren't present to be kind of hung out to dry, so to speak, from your silence. Because I've definitely learned that silence is almost as damaging as actual harmful and hateful speech.
Yeah.
So I'd love some insight into how you tackle that.
That's a learning journey. The first thing I would say is it's really important to remain in relationship. We live in a world at the moment. I spend a lot of time in the US. There are people whose families are completely split because somebody's a Democrat voter and somebody's a Republican. They can't even talk to each other, and that doesn't help anyone. So the first thing I want to encourage you is, those people who are like I was when I was here, naive and ignorant, arrogant, didn't really understand where I was at. Part of the reason that all changed in my life is because people, like some of the people sitting over here, bothered staying friends with me, notwithstanding all of that. So first and foremost, I would say, do whatever you can to stay in relationship. But it is actually okay to gently challenge people. And I say gently because, it's no good. People generally get quite defensive. You call out someone as being racist or being... I had a conversation with someone as an example of this. I was sitting at a cricket game at the Sydney Cricket Ground, and the guy sitting beside me just started going off his nut about the fact that there were two flags flying above the cricket ground. So there was the Australian flag and the Indigenous flag, the Aboriginal flag. And he said, I just don't understand why we can't all sit under the one flag, and that's our shared history. And I said to him, I'm sure if you were talking to an Aboriginal guy here today, he'd probably say the same thing. He'd just be pointing at the other flag. And he actually went, I hadn't really thought about that. I think oftentimes people are willing to think through different opinions and perspectives if you can gently challenge. But if I just told him he was racist and walked away, you get nowhere. I don't think he is racist. To be honest, I just think his perspectives. He's still thinking and still learning. And some people are slower than others. I'm very slow. So stay in a relationship, but it's okay to gently challenge.
Thank you.
I think we're at our last question, but be quick.
Hello. I have some questions. So I just want to ask, how do you measure the real impact of charity donations, and how do you build trust with donors and supporters?
Yeah, wow. So there's a real problem here in measuring impact of charity donations. One of the real challenges that I had, in Opportunity I mentioned before that we tried to measure the impact of the microfinance we were doing. And we came up with this great plan, and we had people walking into people's houses and doing a poverty test. Do you have dirt floor? Do you have a television? Do you have you're measuring, taking all these measurements. And I couldn't help sitting there thinking to myself, if my bank asked me those questions and wanted to come into my house and have a look at my stuff, I would be so angry. But because they were in a position lacking in power, they allowed that to happen. We've tried. People have tried lots of different things. In Opportunity, we've started. In Talenton, we've started using an organisation that does a sort of, we'll call it an opt-in phone poll. And actually, this is a beautiful use of AI. We know there's difficulties with AI. In effect, what they do is they ask a series of questions. The avocado company, for example, that was one of the companies participating in this. And they asked them, just a really broad general question. What do you think of this company? And has it been helpful to work with them? And actually, using their, clever AI, they're able to discern, a very broad set of information about, people were saying, yes, that's been very helpful, but they don't pay fast enough. So we learn heaps of information out of that without being anywhere near as invasive or intrusive in people's lives. It's been super powerful as a tool for us to go out and talk. But I think the key in there is, measuring impact is hard if you're trying to do it in a respectful way. And I like to kind of think, would I be okay with this? And if I wouldn't be okay with it, then there's no way I'm going to ask somebody else to do it. So that measurement thing is a real balance in we do want to understand, but we have to be respectful of the people we're trying to measure. You might say, how do we measure the impact of New College? And you could just really simplistically say, well, the number of degrees that walk out the door. That's an easy count. You wouldn't really pick me up in that story. And so, but how would you find that out? I don't know, you're not going to invite everyone to stand here on the stage. So, you know, I think understanding impact is complicated. But we seek to do mechanisms that are non-intrusive but allow real input. And some of these AI tools actually are great ways of doing that in a respectful manner. So I hope that helps. It's not brilliant, but it's a hard journey. But we should seek to understand the impact. So you've got another question.
Thank you.
Yeah. Go on.
How do you build trust with donors and supporters?
Yeah. I'm a wholehearted believer in honesty. So I was involved in an organisation at one point that was overwhelmingly faith-based. And so they put together an annual report that was designed to be sent out to the faith community. And then they put together a different annual report that was designed to be sent out to the non-faith community because they had some development finance funding. And I just think that's terrible. That's and it's fair to say I gave some feedback, and they changed that, and we had one. And my view was, if we lose funding as a result of being transparent about what we're doing, so be it, because transparency is far more important. So I think donors respect transparency, so you have to be honest, and that means you've got to be honest about your mistakes as well as your wins. Like, charities love telling you the great story. They don't like saying, we tried this program, actually it was harmful to the people we were serving. How many charities have you said that? If I hear a charity saying that, I will support that charity. Not because I want them to be harmful to people. I can see how that might have come across. But because they're willing to be transparent about what they're doing, and they're being honest about their impact. So, honesty and transparency, I think, are the key ways of building trust.
Thank you. I'd now like to call on Matilda Stewart, Secretary of the New College Students Association, to come and move a vote of thanks.
On behalf of all the residents of New College and the New College Postgraduate Village, I'd like to extend our heartfelt gratitude to Mr. Harry Turner for giving up his evening to come and speak to us all. Thank you for reminding us to be grateful for our circumstances and our opportunities that we are so privileged to have. I'm sure we all enjoyed your entertaining anecdotes about college, but even more so, your thought-provoking consideration of college's impact on you and your growth as a person. Your work improving the lives of others was truly inspiring to hear about, particularly your approach centered around listening and walking alongside those who you help. I'd also like to thank you for your reminder of the importance of Reconciliation Week and our collective duty to work together towards justice. I'm sure that all of us will take your advice regarding avoiding prejudice and mitigating injustice to heart. And again, on behalf of all of us, thank you for speaking to us.
Thanks everyone. Dessert's being served. Continue to enjoy your evening.